Hello, everyone. This video, we are continuing the discussion of psychology's major approaches. So this is video 2 in this series. Make sure that you have watched the first video about the biological approach and the reason why we have so many approaches to psychology before starting this one. So this video, we will be talking about the evolutionary approach. So excuse me as we skip to it. And the evolutionary approach of psychology dates back to Charles Darwin initially coming up with his theory of evolution. So when we look at the bottom line of explaining human behaviors and mental processes, everything comes down to Darwin's idea of natural selection. The other term that you should think of when you hear Darwin and evolution would be survival of the fittest. So there's a lot of common misconceptions about what evolutionary theory actually states. When it comes down to it, there's a lot of misunderstandings, and I want to address those first. So misunderstandings of evolution would include things like, oh, well, there used to be this short-necked animal called the giraffe, and it saw trees way up high, and so the kids kept having longer and longer necks until they were able to eat, and then they did okay. And that's completely not true. This is the adaptation that happens in the evolutionary approach is entirely random. And the natural selection piece comes down to we are all born with these random little genetic mutations. And they aren't necessarily good and they aren't necessarily bad. Some of them just make us different. So if we look at something like eye color, humans have a wide variety of eye colors. They don't really have much of a survival advantage, and so they've pretty much been ignored by natural selection. Whereas there are other characteristics that do help people survive. And so the process of natural selection is about when an animal, or in our case, more often humans, are born with one of these random mutations that makes them different in some way than the previous generations, is that going to help them survive long enough to be able to reproduce and have babies that have that same mutation carried down? If so, when that starts to happen on a massive scale, we can start to see that happen in large groups of people or even our entire species. So basically, when we're looking at evolution as an approach to psychology, the evolutionary psychologists are saying we have had human existence for the past 100,000 years to 400,000 years, depending on which group of scientists you want to listen to. So over the course of all of that time, we've had lots of random mutations, and a lot of them have helped us become more equipped to handle the world living out as those cave people. And I'd like us to consider the prehistoric people because civilization as we know it has only existed a few thousand years, and humans have been around for over 100,000 years. And so most of our development as a species has happened living out in the wild in small groups of people. So in short, we look at how the genes and behaviors and mental processes that most humans have today, how did those help enable our ancestors to survive in that environment, enable, in some cases, how it helps us continue to survive? So a couple overarching examples, we could look at things like typically humans need social interactions with each other. Social isolation triggers biological threats within humans, especially in the long term. And so one of the reasons we start to look at that is historically, if we're living out in the wild and we're depending on our group to get food, if we are deciding we're going to isolate ourselves and not get along with anybody else, we end up only able to handle getting the food that we can get by ourselves. So I could go and like hunt a rabbit, maybe catch a few small fish, but if I team up, I have other people that are looking out for me, and we can also team up and go hunt down the big animals like the mastodons and the elephants. And when we can go hunt down the big animals, we can go eat more effectively in our big hunting parties. And so isolation started to become a sign that you weren't as likely to survive. And so as we see how it is the people that were willing to connect and team up, that we still start to see humans that need social isolation. And I'm sorry, not social isolation, we need social interaction, and try to avoid long periods of isolation. I've got a couple other examples to explain how this works. So I'm going to switch over and do a little bit of drawing. So those of you that thought that you could avoid my drawing just because we were out of school were sorely mistaken. So as you look at the screen, we have 4 people and a tree full of food. So we have Ed, Ted, Fred, and Ned. And each one was born with a variation. So we can see Ed was born and he's kind of like us. And so we'll just say if we grab the average human, his genetic code is kind of like ours. And then we have Ted, Ned, and Fred that have something that makes them different. So Fred, we'll start with him. Fred was born with well, we got to explain the berries first. I apologize. So we have these nice pink fruits that grow on the top of the tree. Those are filled with sugar, which evolutionarily means they are high in calories, and we need calories to continue surviving. Those are good. Then you have the small vine that grows up the tree, and it has the smaller fruits that are blue, and those smaller blue fruits have a toxin in it that if you eat more than a few of those, they're going to make you severely sick. If you make a meal out of them, you're probably going to die. So we end up with our trio here. So, and if we start with Fred, Fred was born with his color vision not working quite the way ours does. Whereas our color vision picks up on different wavelengths of light and then allows us to distinguish between them in the form of colors. He has a different spectrum. So he can't see color the way we see him, but he can see our radio signals flying through the air. And so he goes up to the tree and he's hungry. And as he goes to the tree and he sees some of the blue fruits and some of the pink fruits, except he can't see a difference. He just sees fruit. And so as he goes and eats, logically, he's going to go for the one that's a little bit easier to grab. And so as Fred goes and grabs the blue fruit because it's easier for him to get to, he's going to get those stomach aches and he is going to start violently getting ill. And ultimately, when we see Fred getting ill from this, and his inability to distinguish between the different foods because of the way his vision's different, Fred is going to have a lot more trouble growing up to be a functioning adult, finding someone to reproduce with and carry on that gene. And so just to speed up the process, Fred, due to his problem, doesn't make it too far. Let's go to Ted. So Ted and Orange. Ted has everything just like us, but he has a different perception of taste. So when he gets sugar, he perceives that as incredibly bitter, whereas when there's toxins in his food, he finds that incredibly sweet. So if you consider the evolutionary purpose of taste, different tastes give us different clues about what we're eating. And for Ted, when you give Ted one of these pink fruits, he feels it so bitter he can't handle it. And what he prefers to eat are these blue fruits. And as much as he knows he shouldn't be eating the blue fruit, it's the only thing that on this tree that doesn't taste horribly nasty to him. And so eventually he falls into the trap of listening to his taste buds. And since his taste buds did not detect the right chemical with the right perception, he ends up poisoning himself over and over again in life and lives his life sick until eventually he will pass away alone, not reproducing again. And then we have Ned. Ned sees color like us. He tastes like us. But Ned has the biological trigger for sleep is different. So where humans, most of us, when it starts to get dark, we start to feel more tired. Whereas Ned reverses. It starts to get dark, and that's when Ned starts to energize. And so if we assume everything else is just like us, we can't just lay in bed not sleeping all day, and then stay up running around all night. Ned needs to sleep, but his body tells him to sleep during the day. So there's a problem already. He's being socially isolated by the group because he wants to sleep all day and they're out there working hard. But then when he gets up at night, he can't collect food because he can't see things well enough. And one night he just decides he's going to go out for a walk because he's sick of being stuck in the cave with all of his sleeping roommates. And then he ends up getting eaten by a tiger who he couldn't see coming because he was blind in the dark and just wouldn't stay in the cave because we can't stay in one place that long. So now Ned's dead too, which leaves us to Ed. Ed is now able to sleep at night when he can't see and be awake during the day when he can see. So then when he's awake, he goes and he gets the high sugar, high calorie fruits, and he is able to see the difference between them. And so he can avoid the poisonous fruits, eat lots of the high calorie fruits. And then Ed, since he is a healthy provider and the healthiest person in this family, will end up finding a nice partner and they will end up having lots of babies. And so as they end up having lots and lots of babies, those babies have similar traits and they continue to have lots of their own babies. And now what we start to see is this exponential growth of all of these different children that start having the similar genetic code. So in this reason, evolution is typically a much better explanation of why do all humans have certain characteristics, or we could talk about in the scale of like a massive group of humans. This will not be very useful in explaining an individual behavior as much as it is human behavior overall. With that said, I do want us to go and still try to take a look at our example. So here again, we have this guy who is wrestling against a brown bear. So when we start to look at from the evolutionary approach and how certain behaviors or mental processes could be beneficial for humankind to have to help them share their genes with future generations, take a few minutes, think about what your answer would be. According to the evolutionary approach, why would he wrestle a grizzly bear? Once again, I want you to pause this video, think about what your answer would be, and then we'll talk about a few potential correct answers. So as you are coming back, there's a few different ways we could approach this. One of the first flags that hopefully came up in your mind is most humans don't do this. And that's true. This is a weak example when we're trying to look overall. But we can still look and target this behavior and say, hey, how would this behavior be evolutionarily beneficial? So you could have come up with a few examples. One example, of course, is strength is valued in survival. So if you can be one of the elite people and you have grown up to be the strongest person that can handle defending your tribe or your group of people from any incoming invader, that is a sign that evolution will favor you, because as you get invaded, if you keep defending those invaders off, you are more likely to survive and you are more likely to be seen as a valuable protector for that tribe. So they will continue to include you and support you through that process. Another way we could look at this would be the ability to, I'm losing my train of thought, I apologize. The ability to tame animals. If you were looking at this, maybe just being an animal trainer is what we're actually seeing, and having that ability to, again, take something that would normally be threatening and turn it into entertainment will, again, get the support of the tribe and make it more likely that you will be desired and continue to work towards that. As always, there's a lot of different options we can go with on these. Those were just two that we can consider. If you want to check another one by me, by all means, feel free to do so. Just remember, in general, we're looking for characteristics that all humans share. So stay tuned for my next approach in the next video, and I'm looking forward to seeing